All right, a lot of serious business this morning. A few programming notes to share with you. Once I'm done, you will hear from our friend Sharon Birch, the spokesperson for the President of the General Assembly. Tomorrow, you will have a heavy day. We've asked Amy Pope, the head of the International Organization for Migration, who's currently in Sudan, to brief you. She'll be here at 11 a.m. via video conference from Port Sudan to brief you on her ongoing trip. At noon, you will have to deal with me. And then at 1 p.m., there will be a briefing by the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. And that commission includes Navid Pillay, Miloon Kothari, and Chris Sidoti. Then at 2 p.m., Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, will be here live in person in this very room. This morning, the Secretary General is in Cali in Colombia, where he is attending the high-level segment of the 16th meeting of the Conference of Parties on the Convention of Biological Diversity. In his remarks, he highlighted that nature is life, and yet we are waging a war against it, a war where there can be no winner. He's, in fact, about to deliver those remarks, and he's expected to warn that no country, rich or poor, is immune to the devastation inflicted by climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, pollution, adding that these environmental crises are intertwined and they, of course, know no borders. The Secretary General noted the framework adopted 2 years ago in Montreal. The world made bold commitments to living in harmony with nature by mid-century. He said we must now turn those promises into acts. This morning, he also met with, he had a series of bilateral. He met with Leslie Voltaire, the president of the Transitional Presidential Council of Haiti. They agreed on the need to expedite the political transition towards holding elections. In the meeting, the Secretary General appealed to Haitian stakeholders to set aside their differences and work together for Haiti's peace and security. This afternoon, the Secretary General will engage in discussions with indigenous people and local communities, as well as representatives of civil society, including youth and women. And I think he just met with also Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia. Tomorrow on the sidelines, he will speak to an event on plastic pollution organized by the UN Environment Program. He will also speak to journalists at a press conference before heading out of Cali and going back to New York. You saw that last night we issued a statement in the Secretary General's name in which he expressed his deep concern at the adoption yesterday by the Israeli Knesset of 2 laws concerning the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, better known to all of us as UNRWA, and the laws which, if implemented, would likely prevent UNRWA from continuing its essential work in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, as mandated by the General Assembly of these United Nations. The Secretary General emphasized that UNRWA is the principal means by which essential assistance is supplied to Palestine refugees in the occupied Palestinian territory. There is no alternative to UNRWA. He calls on Israel to act consistently with its obligations under the Charter of the UN and its other obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and those concerning the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. National legislation cannot override or alter those obligations. He is bringing this matter to the attention of the General Assembly and will keep the Assembly closely informed on the situation as it develops. Philippe Lazzarini, the Commissioner General of the agency, added that these bills will not only deepen the suffering of Palestinians, especially in Gaza, where people have been going through more than a year of sheer hell. He said these bills increase the suffering of the Palestinians and are nothing less than collective punishment. Mr. Lazzarini also sent a letter to the President of the General Assembly to express those concerns in details. Turning to the situation on the ground, our humanitarian colleagues tell us they're extremely concerned by reports of the exceptionally high number of casualties in Bet Laia area north of Gaza, which they cannot access. OCHA says aid workers and emergency responders continue to face extreme challenges in assisting people across the Gaza Strip, often with immense risk to their personal safety. Since the beginning of the month, at least 14 humanitarian workers and 4 health workers have been killed and many, many others injured across the Gaza Strip. That includes some who were off duty. In total, since October of last year, 322 aid workers, including 315 Palestinians and 7 foreigners, were killed. This includes 237 staff of the United Nations, of whom 233 were UNRWA staff members. In North Gaza, OCHA says the continued attacks and access constraints for humanitarian partners are severely hindering the delivery of life-saving health services and critical supplies, such as fuel or medicine. Only 2, or just about 10%, out of 20 health service points in 2 hospitals, Kamal Adwan and Al Auda, remain somewhat functional, hampering the delivery of life-saving health services to all those who need it in that area. UNRWA health teams have relocated to Gaza City, where only one of their medical points at a small school remains functional. After the agency's medical points in North Gaza were destroyed, the World Food Program and other partners have lost access to most of North Gaza Governorate. The World Food Program also warns that the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza could soon escalate into famine unless immediate action is taken. As winter approaches, the lack of food and other vital humanitarian supplies entering the Strip will likely lead to catastrophic consequences, WFP says. Earlier this month, as you will recall, an integrated food security phase classification report already warned that by November, more than 90% of Gaza's population will face severe food insecurity. Now, the situation in northern Gaza continues to deteriorate. The likelihood of a larger group being impacted by famine will surely increase unless conditions on the ground improve. Restrictions on humanitarian aid coming into Gaza are severe. During the month of October, WFP says that 5,000 metric tons of food have been delivered into Gaza, amounting to just 20% of basic food assistance for the 1.1 million human beings who depend on WFP's life-saving support there. And you will have seen that our friend Tor Venesland briefed the Security Council earlier this morning. He spoke to council members on the continued violence in Gaza, noting that just yesterday in Gaza, Israeli forces struck a building in Beit Lahia, leaving at least 90 Palestinians missing or killed, including at least 25 children, according to local authorities in their preliminary assessment. The strike is yet another deadly series of recent mass casualty incidents in north of Gaza. Last week, Mr. Venesland said he visited the Gaza Strip and said what he witnessed defies imagination. In the southern part of the Strip, he saw the sheer magnitude of devastation this war has inflicted on the population and saw thousands living in makeshift tents with nowhere else to go as winter approaches. Mr. Venesland unequivocally condemns the widespread killing and injuring of civilians in Gaza, the endless displacement of the population in Gaza, and the shocking mistreatment of detainees. And he also condemned the continued holding of hostages and the firing of rockets towards Israeli population centers, which has continued this month. Mr. Venesland said we must have a ceasefire and release the hostages in Gaza now. Without a ceasefire, he said, the fundamental shift required to scale up humanitarian assistance that can meet the current catastrophe will be impossible. And just to note the situation north in Lebanon, we know with concern that our colleagues in the peacekeeping mission tell us that this afternoon a rocket hit the UN peacekeeping headquarters in Nakora, setting a vehicle workshop on fire. Peacekeepers were not in the bunkers at the time. Initial reports suggest that 3 peacekeepers from Austria suffered minor injuries. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. The rocket was fired from north of the mission's headquarters, and now UNIFIL has opened an investigation into the incident. We once again strongly remind all actors, including Hezbollah, including the Israel Defense Forces, to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and peacekeepers. The inviolability of UN installations must be respected by all. We urge the parties to de-escalate immediately and return to a cessation of hostilities under the framework of Security Council Resolution 1701. In this regard, the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon and the UN Peacekeeping Force in Lebanon and their leadership continue to engage with the parties to support efforts towards a diplomatic solution. And on the humanitarian front, our colleagues are telling us that in Lebanon, strikes last night and today on the Baalbek, Hermel, and Bekaa in the east of the country reportedly killed at least 60 people and injured dozens. That's what local authorities are telling us. OCHA underscores that under international humanitarian law, parties to the conflict must take all feasible precautions to avoid and minimize harm to civilians and civilian objects. Civilians must be protected at all times wherever they are, whether they stay or whether they leave. UN Women also warns that women and girls are particularly impacted by the ongoing crisis, facing grave risks to their health, safety, and dignity. And just to note that Lebanon, a country which is in crisis to say the least, paid its dues to the United Nations today. So we say a very big thank you to our friends in Beirut for their full payment to the regular budget, which brings us up to 144. Moving to Ukraine, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that attacks last night and today in the cities of Kryvyi, Kharkiv, and Kyiv led to 30 civilian casualties, including healthcare workers. The attacks damaged hospitals, apartment buildings in Kharkiv. That's what local authorities are telling us. Humanitarian partners have mobilized to provide emergency aid and psychological support. They're also distributing emergency shelter materials to cover damage, as well as blankets and solar lamps. Meanwhile, hostilities in the front lines of Kherson and Donetsk region and yesterday and today resulted in more than 20 civilian casualties, including 2 children and healthcare workers. The attacks also damaged a dozen houses and other civilian facilities. That's what local authorities are also telling us. And in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the peacekeeping mission there tells us that on Sunday they deployed a patrol in response to the presence of members of armed groups near Fataki, which is in Djigu territory in Ituri province. The members of the armed group retreated as a result of that intervention by UN peacekeepers. The following day, that would be yesterday, another patrol was also dispatched to protect civilians near Loda, about 15 kilometers northeast of Djigu. The patrol was dispatched after members of the Zaire militia attacked a Congolese armed forces checkpoint. Our peacekeepers on the ground are continuing to monitor the situation actively. And in Sudan, as I mentioned, Amy Pope is there, the head of the International Organization for Migration. She's in Port Sudan today to raise awareness of the needs and to highlight the cost of displacement crisis there. Her visit also comes as IOM is releasing this week new figures showing that the displacement number has hit 11 million human beings in Sudan. That's the world's largest displacement crisis. That's up 200,000 men, women, and children since September. Another 3.1 million people have traveled across borders to flee the fighting. In total, nearly 30% of Sudan's population has now been displaced. More than half of the people displaced are women. The Director General underscores that with the proper amount of funding, there is much that can be done to help people get shelter and proper sanitation, but warn that progress will always be limited as long as the war continues. And just to, yes, and as I mentioned, Amy Pope will be our guest tomorrow before the briefing. We'll share with you the exact time. Today is the International Day of Care and Support. According to a new estimate by the International Labour Organization, 708 million women worldwide are outside the labor force because of unpaid care responsibilities. ILO underlines the importance of adequate investment in care policies. It will be essential if we are to tackle growing inequality and move towards greater social justice. Madame.
Yes, thank you. Tomorrow there will be a vote in terms of the resolution for the financial blockade imposed by the United States on Cuba. And I think this is the 32nd time I'm speaking under correction in terms of that number, that the Assembly will address this issue. What is the Secretary General's office response in terms of concerns raised in financial suppression on Cuba, that it might persist despite international calls for this change?
I mean, we've seen the overwhelming result in the General Assembly every year. Sadly, there's been no change in the situation, and there continues to be a negative impact on the people of Cuba. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. A couple of follow-ups on UNRWA. Is the United Nations doing anything to prepare for the ban on UNRWA in the Palestinian territories? That's first.
Well, you know, there's the law, as we understand it, gives 90 days, right, before it's implemented. We are in contact with Israeli authorities. The Secretary General is writing in this dispatched a letter not too long ago, a few hours ago, to the Prime Minister of Israel, outlining his concerns, the issues of international law that has been raised by this law. So we're at an early stage. Obviously, if it is implemented, it is clear that it will have a devastating impact on the humanitarian situation of Palestinians in the occupied in the occupied territory.
Is the United Nations, is the Secretary General doing anything to mobilize support from the international community, from other countries to contest what the Israeli Knesset has done?
Well, he has been in touch with a number of representatives of member states, and I think we are very heartened by the statements of support we have seen from all quarters. And in fact, I think a level of unity from a number of countries that often don't agree on much in their support for UNRWA and the critical work that it does.
Can you tell us what those countries are?
Well, I mean, I'm just talking about the public statements. But the Secretary General's had a number of conversations. Amélie?
Thanks, Steph. Follow-up as well on UNRWA. You mentioned Philippe Lazzarini writing to the GA, and the Secretary General said as well that he will keep the GA informed. The GA is the one who created UNRWA. I mean, what does the GA expect from the SG expect from the GA? Sorry, considering Israel does not listen to anyone.
Well, I mean, first of all, anyway. The Secretary General is also written to the President of the General Assembly. That letter was also sent an hour or so ago. Part of it is to keep the General Assembly informed, because, as you rightfully say, UNRWA's work derives its mandate from the General Assembly. So we will, of course, be seeking guidance from the General Assembly should this law be implemented, but it's also just keeping them informed. Margaret.
What about the Office of Legal Affairs? What's their role in this? Are they looking into implications?
I mean, yes, they're obviously providing legal advice, and I will leave it at that. I mean, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And also on UNRWA, this morning in the Security Council, the Israeli permanent representative again raised the issue of someone he said worked for UNRWA, Mohammed Abu Aitwa, saying they killed him last week, and he was criticizing the SG for condemning his death. But last week, UNRWA said he was not dead; he was in Egypt. Right. So, can you just clarify your position?
I don't think anything's changed since UNRWA said he was not dead.
So then, the SG did not criticize his death. I wasn't sure where that came from.
No,
okay, thank you.
Benno, then Michelle, and then Ibtisam.
Thank you, Steph. So, if the law is implemented in the way that the Knesset has decided, is there a way you can imagine that UNRWA still can at least partly go on with their work?
No.
Good.
Michelle.
Yeah, on that note, can you give us a few sort of practical examples about how this law will affect UNRWA and the way it works?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most, there are two main issues. One is on international humanitarian law, right? And that Israel, as the occupying power, continues to be required to ensure the needs of the population are met. If Israel is not in a position to meet those needs, it has an obligation to allow and to facilitate the activities of the UN, including UNRWA and other humanitarian agencies, to meet those needs, right? So, should UNRWA cease to operate? And for us, there is no alternative, right? Israel would have to fill the vacuum and meet those needs, otherwise be in violation of international law. The other one relates to the conventions and privileges and immunities of the United Nations, which includes the inviolability of UN premises, the needs to facilitate the work of UN officials in as they and to protect them as they go about their official functions.
And are those, what you've just told us, is that what was raised in the SG's letter?
I think in more legal and probably better terms, yes.
Yeah, and then just when I say on a practical level, like for people outside the building, can you explain?
Well, I mean,
how
UNRWA runs schools, hospitals, right? Those would UNRWA would then not be able to work, and its teachers wouldn't be able to function. Its international staff wouldn't be there. I mean, UNRWA provides, and as you well know, a host of humanitarian, social services, educational services. Those would no longer be able to be run by the agency.
And that is because all their work that is done in Gaza and the West Bank, they have to go through Israel to get there.
Well, Israel has the authority as the occupying power. So if this law were actually to be implemented, it would have a devastating impact. Ibtisam.
First follow-up regarding that and the statement where the SG is going to refer the issue to the General Assembly. Do you think there is also a place to the ICG to play here?
There is, and this is according to legal precedent and to various conventions, if there is a dispute on issues regarding international conventions such as privileges between the UN and a member state, that could be taken to the International Court of Justice. But those are just procedures that exist for many of our international legal instruments.
And is the Secretary General going to take such a step?
We're not there yet.
Okay. I have another follow-up. On your statement regarding Gaza and WFP statement, I know that in order to declare famine, you need a specific percentage, etc. But could you tell us if you are seeing that people or children are dying because of hunger in Gaza? Thank you.
That's not a question I'm able to answer right now. We'll refer, because it's pretty precise. I will get to WFP, but I can tell you that the food situation is getting worse in Gaza.
And I have another one on Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
I heard your statement, and I don't know if you are aware of some reports about women who committing suicide in some villages because they are afraid of rape and sexual violence. Are you aware of these reports?
I personally have not seen them, but I think that's a good question to ask Ms. Pope, who has traveled around various parts of Sudan. Tony?
Thank you, Steph. Also on UNRWA, today the U.S. Permanent Representative Ms. Greenfield. She mentioned, or she called on the Secretary General to create a mechanism to review and address allegations that UNRWA personnel have ties to Hamas and other terrorist groups. Would that be kind of a solution that the SG would consider in this regard?
Well, obviously, we take very seriously the proposal made. I can tell you that, and as you well know, there have been a number of mechanisms already in place, notably OIOS, which continues to work on these issues. There was a recent letter from the Israeli government, I think about last week, to us, raising specific issues. The letter was received. It is being looked at extremely seriously. And plus you have the work that Madame Colonna did on the issue of neutrality and just kind of broader systemic issues, which our colleagues at UNRWA are acting upon.
Just one more question, a follow-up on the humanitarian call, like the UN humanitarian appeal on Lebanon. Do we have any update?
I don't, but it's all up on the internet, on the dashboard. Gabriel, and then I'll go to Mike on screen.
Thank you, Steph. Does the Secretary General see any scenario where UNRWA is unable to work in Gaza and needs to be shut down after this law goes into effect in 90 days?
Well, I mean, that's the scenario, right? I mean, if we, we would not be, if the law is fully implemented, it seems very difficult to see how UNRWA could continue to work and how our colleagues, our international colleagues, can continue to be there, and also would raise great safety concern for our national colleagues.
The Israeli ambassador has already said that he thinks that Israel thinks that other UN agencies could fill the gap of UNRWA and do the same job. The World Food Program, WHO, for example. Is that something the Secretary General thinks is at all possible?
We don't agree with that assessment.
And two more quick follow-ups. The Austria's defense ministry said it was 8 of their peacekeepers that were injured in the UNIFIL incident.
My understanding, things have obviously things move on. The number I think I gave you of injured was slightly injured with 3. I think there were 8 at the scene when it happened. That's my understanding.
Thank you,
Mike.
Sir. A couple questions for you. Number one, kind of parallel or in conjunction with, I guess, this pressure campaign that the UN is going to launch to try to get the implementation of the new UNRWA laws halted or stopped completely.
Feel free to ask whatever question you want, but I never talked about launching a pressure campaign. I just said we'd been in touch with a number of member states, and we appreciate, to brief them on the situation, and we appreciate their support. But please, go on.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Is there any opportunity during this time, this 90-day period, as you're in talks with Israel and other allies, for the UN and UNRWA to reflect at all and say, hey, we're at fault in this too. It's not just big, bad, evil Israel, that UNRWA stuck its head in the sand on so many occasions when it was given evidence of its facilities being used for terror purposes, when it was given evidence of terror infiltration. And by the way, the Secretary General did, in fact, mourn. He called him a colleague, the man that led the massacre in southern Israel during October 7th, called him a colleague just last week. These mistakes over and over and over again. Is there any modicum of self-reflection being done during this 90-day period where the UN and UNRWA can go to Israel and say, hey, let's meet somewhere in the middle here?
Look, we are always open to dialogue with the Israeli government. And I spoke to my UNRWA colleagues this morning. They were telling us while they continue to have operational contacts, they no longer have real official contacts. But as you know, when issues were raised, especially since October 7th, by the Israeli government to UNRWA, UNRWA took action. When we are given information, we take action, and I think we've been very clear and very transparent on that. There are a lot of allegations that are floated in the media that which we are not getting any official communications with regarding, which makes it a little difficult to answer them. And also, as a reminder that, and as we've told all of you a number of times, is that for the past number of years, the UN has shared with the Israeli authorities the list of all its Palestinian workers working in Gaza and the West Bank, as it does with the Lebanese authorities for those who work there, and the Jordanians for those who work there, and the Syrians for those who work there. And from what my UNRWA colleagues tell me, is there have been no issues raised when those names were shared. There have been over the years issues with UNRWA, and I think they've addressed them head on, whether it's the issues of curriculum and others. Your next question.
Yes, sir. UNIFIL released a tweet today actually criticizing Hezbollah, and it normally wouldn't be something that stands out. UNIFIL has never before issued a tweet with Hezbollah's name in it, either spelling, and has only mentioned Hezbollah on its website a handful of times and never in a critical manner. So the tweet today was really stark in that respect. Any insight as to why UNIFIL finally, after all these years, decided to take Hezbollah to task on this specific issue?
Well, I think Hezbollah has been mentioned in the regular reports by UNIFIL to the and the Secretary General's regular reports by UNIFIL to the Security Council. I mean, it's a fact that the rocket fired today was north of UNIFIL headquarters, and according to them, either by Hezbollah or an affiliated group, but they've launched an investigation.
So it's only when it strikes a UN position and never.
Well, I mean,
it goes into Israel, no mention. But if it strikes a UN,
Mike, as I tell often your colleagues, you and I you ask me a question, I give you an answer. You and all your colleagues are free to analyze it and frame it in whichever way you want. That is your freedom.
Thank you, Steph.
Stefano, you are free to ask me a question.
Thank you for the freedom.
That may be taken away from you.
But will the Secretary General try to speak with the Prime Minister Netanyahu? We know that you said before that he tried to call him and he didn't pick up. But now, will he try it again?
I mean, you know, at this point, the communication is done in writing because I think it is more precise. But obviously, if there's an opportunity to speak, they would speak. Yes,
the question is very simple.
No, I answered in a convoluted way to a simple question. That's my right. Deji, then Vladimir, then
Finally,
Evelyn.
okay. So maybe I missed this part, but
I'm sure you did.
Okay, so would this impact of UNRWA, I mean, those two bills, will it affect other operations of UNRWA outside Israel and occupied Palestinian territory? For example, in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, would there be any?
I mean, would it have
How would that impact?
Would have some knock-on effect, perhaps? But the law the law passed by the Knesset only applies to those areas under within Israel or areas where Israel has control as the occupying power, not in Jordan, not in Syria, not in Lebanon.
So technically speaking, there wouldn't be that much effect.
Correct.
Okay. So secondly, I just asked the deputy representative of the U.S. on this issue. He said U.S. is going to try to slow the process of implementation of this bill. I mean, practically speaking, what options does the UN still have to, let's say, to face this might be never inevitable implementation of the bills?
Well, I would tell you the UNRWA's mandate was given to it by the General Assembly. The General Assembly isn't the General Assembly. The General Assembly is 193 member states. So we very much appreciate efforts by any member state to help us get over this hurdle, which is minimizing what this actually is.
But there's very limited options now for the Secretariat.
That would be a correct assessment.
Okay, one last question. Still on the issue of UNRWA. You just mentioned that there's still operational communication between UNRWA and Israeli officials, but no official,
more senior level official meetings. That's correct.
Does that mean that from the point of UNRWA, this bill's already started its you know, they still
No, I
they've
mean,
already
I think no, I
feel
wouldn't.
the-
I wouldn't.
feel
I wouldn't. I mean, the laws passed are very specific. There's a 90-day before full implementation. We hope it does not come to pass. Volodymyr.
Thank you, Stéphane. My question is not about UNRWA. Mariana Katsarova, the UN Special Rapporteur on human rights violations in Russia, prepares reports on the human rights situation in the Russian Federation. However, Russia does not allow the UN Special Rapporteur to enter its territory. So how does the UN Secretary General assess this behavior of Russia, which he visited last week?
Look, special rapporteurs, as you know, are independent, fully independent from the Secretary General, whether in the naming of the special rapporteurs or in the granting of mandates. They, in broad terms, perform a very important, they are a very important cog in the international human rights system. Some of those rapporteurs are not able to travel to the country or the area that which they cover. It doesn't stop them from reporting through other sources, but we believe broadly that all member states should cooperate with them. Evelyn.
Do we have any information whether UNRWA can still function in Gaza? Because with all the fighting going on, and
I mean, I think we've been very clear on the limits placed on all the humanitarian agencies in Gaza because of the continued fighting and the continued restrictions, especially in terms of access to the north. Benno, Michel, Edie, Ibtisam, and then Halas.
If UNRWA ceased to work, would the United Nations be willing to help Israel to fill that vacuum?
UNRWA is the United Nations. I don't understand the question.
So, if it all happens as the Knesset decided, and there is that vacuum, people will suffer, and you said somebody needs to fill that vacuum. If Israel is asking you then to step in with following a successor to UNRWA, would you be
I think we're getting into hypotheticals. Let's remember the scale of UNRWA, right? I think more, if I'm not mistaken, more than 30,000 staff members. Vast majority, almost the number is extremely high, are local staff. So the Palestinians who teach in Palestinian schools in the West Bank, who are they exactly? They're UNRWA teachers. Who are they exactly replaced by? Right. So I think we're getting into this sort of absurd hypotheticals, right? I mean, there is a humanitarian organization called UNRWA that was created by the General Assembly to provide humanitarian assistance until such a time that a political solution could be found. There is no political solution currently. We keep hoping for one. Doesn't seem like there's one on the horizon. Our point is that UNRWA needs to continue to do its work.
But can you promise to the Palestinian people that you won't leave them alone?
We will continue to do whatever we can to assist the civilians in the Occupied Palestinian Territory. Michelle, then Edie.
On this issue of implementation,
Yeah.
what is your understanding of how this law can be prevented from being implemented?
I think, listen, I'm not an expert in the mechanics of Israeli governmental procedures, but we do hope that the law is not implemented. Edie, then Ibtisam.
Thank you, Steph. The Israeli ambassador today told the Security Council that a lot of aid is getting into the north and that it's sitting in trucks and it isn't being delivered. And he, I believe, implicitly blaming the UN and others for not getting it to the people in need. What's the UN's response?
To respond to implicit meanings. What I can tell you, and I think is, we've been telling you, I think as Fahan told you over the last 10 days, there are almost no humanitarian missions that are able to access the north. And it is the fact that it is factual that there are trucks that Israel allows to go into Gaza that sit on the other side of the fence, the wall, whatever you want to call it. Getting to that, being able to distribute it freely without interference to those civilians who need it, that's the challenge. Ibtisam.
Just a practical question first. Did you get any...
The what question, sorry?
On details. Did you get any orders from the Israelis to evacuate any of your premises, especially in Jerusalem or the West Bank?
No, not that I'm aware of, not since the passing of the law.
Okay, and I have like a big picture question. What do you think this banning of the UN or part of the UN which implication this would have beyond Palestine? Thank you.
Look, it's... there are other places in the world where the UN has faced challenges. I think, should this law be implemented, it would set a very dangerous precedent for the United Nations humanitarian work wherever it does its work. Au point où on en est. Yeah.
So if this order goes into effect, I'm presuming that the UN is still going to ask for compensation for all the buildings of UNRWA that have been damaged, destroyed.
I think that's separate. That's a separate track.
But would UNRWA's being banned from there hinder your ability to get compensation?
Well, I think, let me just put it out, our efforts will continue. What the outcome will be, we'd have to see. But obviously, we will continue. We would pursue that as we've done in other places. Gabby?
Thank you. Thanks, Steph. Just a quick follow-up to Edie's question. The Israeli ambassador in the Security Council this morning said 700 trucks filled with aid are awaiting collection inside Gaza. Is that true?
I don't have the number of trucks off the top of my head. We have a dashboard that you can access. But again, the fact that, things get put in through, let's say, Karim Abu Salam, Karim Shalom, yes, they are there. But if there is insecurity, if there's continued fighting, if we can't get to it, that's also true. Thank you. Wait for Sharon. Don't move for Sharon.